Check. Can you hear me?
Okay.
You can hear me now.
Hand it over to Matthew. Take us into the break.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Matthew Boeckman, and that is a loud mic. I'll try and watch that. This is Rewriting DevOps, lessons learned from a 15-month software rewrite. Just to get started, struggling with all kinds of little technical problems this morning. We'll try and do it the old-fashioned way. There we go. This is me. I run a strategic consulting organization at Dryas.io. I'm a startup advisor and DevOps coach. Probably more interesting than that is I'm a 19 years DevOps veteran. You should all laugh or roll your eyes when I say that, because DevOps, of course, isn't that old. What I mean when I say that is I was a system and network administrator in my early career, and I just never got the memo that I was supposed to be a jerk to the developers. So I spent my entire career working with and as part of software development teams trying to deliver business value for the companies we work for. Most recently, I was the vice president of infrastructure at Craftsy, which is the story I'm going to tell you today. This all happened at a startup from Denver. One quick last thing is I was actually fortunate enough to spend the first 9 years of my career here in the Kansas City market working with startups. Some of you may have heard of Sapio Technologies. I'm really proud to say I was part of their founding team. And they're still a pretty active business here in your community. So this is Craftsy. Craftsy is an online education startup focused on the hobbyist quilting, knitting, cake decorating industry. And as a beginning point, I know you don't usually think quilting and like microservices, but we were a pretty functional engineering team, and we just happened to find a really interesting niche that there was a lot of interest around. What's meaningful about this in the context of the talk is that Craftsy suffered or experienced, depending on your perspective, 200% year-on-year growth for 4 years running. That creates a lot of stress on the systems and the applications that we write. And it's kind of hard to get your head around what that really means. So I've got a visual. Better? Ooh. Better. I've got a visual aid. So early in the company's history, we had built this online education platform, and we thought if people are going to learn how to knit from us, we should sell them yarn too. So this was our first fulfillment system. It was a wire rack shelf from Costco, and it was totally full of yarn. 3.5 years later, we launched a 180,000 square foot warehouse in Indianapolis. That's the kind of growth that the company experienced during my time there. What this means for us in software is we had built originally an online classes experience for people to learn these skills. And then as the business evolved, we glommed on a whole bunch of other products. We added a pattern marketplace, and we added a projects place where members could share the stuff they had built. We added this ability to buy physical goods from us. And what we ended with was a product that had sort of evolved through lurches. And our members, while we had had this really great growth, our members really weren't engaging with our products in different ways. Stated really simply, the application didn't do a good job of cross-selling. And my first piece of advice for everybody is before you embark on a rewrite, before you think you have a good reason to do a rewrite, find the business need that really drives it. And the business came to us in our 5th year and said, look, we're not growing the way we need to, and it's basically because of this problem, so go figure out a way to make your application better. As engineering leaders, we knew that that wasn't going to be enough of a reason to do a full rewrite, but we really wanted to, so we started coming up with all the other reasons to do a rewrite. A little bit sort of before and after, we came up with our list of everything we didn't like about our existing system and everything we wanted to get to with our rewrite, and we had this 15-month agile fall water scrum rewrite process we were going to engage in. Our DevOps practice when we started was really strong. If you'd have talked to me in 2012, I would have told you we had a great practice. Candidly, we really had ops who acted like devs, and we had devs who helped out ops and collaborated, but we really had separate teams and separate work streams. And one of our big things we wanted to do was collapse that and get to a much better place from a DevOps standpoint. The other thing I'll really call out here is we wanted to move to immutable infrastructure. We had built a monolith, and we wanted to try and adopt, surprise, microservices. So this is sort of what things looked like in the app. We had this big Java monolith sitting on top of Postgres, heavily bound by sessions. This is a mistake. It shouldn't say poor caching model. It should say volatile caching model that caught on fire daily. We had a very tightly coupled front and back end logic, and that was creating constraints for us as a development organization. And then lastly, in our culture, we were doing a weekly release. And again, when we started in 2010, 2011, getting code out the door every week was pretty good. We were proud of ourselves. But as the business evolved, we recognized we weren't getting things, features and new opportunities for the business to engage with our users out the door fast enough, so we wanted to get to continuous deployment. Partly because of the monolith and partly because we'd done a terrible job at testing and automation, we spent days in regression every release cycle to get things out the door. We needed to change that and really needed to reduce the risk profile of every individual release. And then we wanted to do some things with functional teams, moving those to objective-based teams. So that's sort of the context for you of where we were and why we were tackling this project. You're all engineers, you're going to want to see some diagrams. So this is the system that got us to the point where basically the project started. And I say ooh, and that's really not fair. This system helped power the growth that I've just described, so it's really, really a good architecture, but we were fundamentally at the edge of horizontal scale here. And if you notice, this little box down here, anytime the database flapped its wings, the whole company had seizures. It was a massive constraint and a significant risk in our architecture. So what we went to is this. This is probably a little hard to read, and I apologize for that, but each one of these boxes essentially illustrates a service area or a pile of services and microservices. We got to this place where everything was highly decoupled. All of these boxes are capable of independently scaling from each other, and there are no dependencies across any of the code of the systems architecture associated here. So that was sort of where we wanted to get to. And again, because you're engineers, you're going to have questions about the tools that we used and adopted. The talk is not a technical tools talk. We're really going to talk about culture more than tools, but these are questions that I end up getting asked. So the things that probably worth calling out here mainly is that we settled on the HashiCorp tool set, and I shouldn't say settled. We were really happy to work with HashiCorp for Packer and Consul and Terraform to get to the kind of immutable infrastructure that we wanted. And it may be obvious, if not obvious yet, is we were an AWS shop. We had started off building everything in AWS. We really liked that environment, and we continued that through the project. So I'm just going to kind of tell you the story and hopefully share with you some things that we learned about DevOps along the way. So this is our timeline. The first arrow is, the first 4 or 5 years of our business. In July 2015, we embarked on a proof of concept, sort of phase 1 of the project, which was really just go prototype a bunch of stuff. Let's figure out where we're going to start on this. And during that time, our dev and our ops teams worked really well together. As we embarked on phase 2, we knew that we were going to have to split the work streams. Craftsy being ultimately an online e-commerce system, fourth quarter is huge, Black Friday is huge. Black Friday for us was responsible for more revenue than any other 2 months, non-Q4 2 months of the year combined, so hard to overstate how necessary it was for us to be ready for that. So we were going to have this split bimodal operation where dev was going to be mode 2 and ops was going to be mode 1, which probably sounds familiar to a lot of folks. And then after the holidays, everybody was going to get back together and sort of finish the project and get ready to launch this, this may be disaster and maybe great success. And we had a hard launch date of September 30th the next year. It was hard because going into Q4, we couldn't accept the risk of launching this huge rewritten microservice architecture. So what I want to focus on right now is really just phase 2, where we had dev and ops sort of split roles. If you worked at Craftsy in that time, what I was really saying, we actually, this is awful, and I would not encourage anybody to do this. We spent weeks trying to figure out a way not to make that split stream true. We had not been a bimodal shop before. But for the ops team, I was basically going to them and saying, here's the deal. The devs are going to go write all of the architecture and all of the application without your help and without your input, but then you're going to get help later. It's going to be great, right? And that became kind of our mantra. It's going to be great. Everybody had concerns. Everybody was worried. Everybody had doubt, and they had lots of good reason to be doubtful and to be worried. But we had to kind of overcome that somehow. So this little gun show comic dog, who I'm sure everybody has seen, we just posted him all over the office and reminded everybody, like, let's just get through this, folks. It's going to be okay. But there was a great deal of uncertainty and distrust that sort of took seed in our team. So one of the other things that we tried to do during this time to keep the teams together while they were operating separately is we really doubled down on our culture. So this is a nameless engineer, and this is our cultural artifact, the enrolled Sash. It has, as most cultural artifacts do, a hilarious backstory that you don't care about. But what it really was as a cultural trapping was something that we awarded to people who took a risk that didn't go well. We found, I mean, as a startup, certainly, as a DevOps culture, absolutely, but I think for every business, you have to be able to reward people for taking smart risks. You have to be able to make it clear that failure is an option and, in fact, is actually encouraged. That's how you're going to get your teams to give you the most. So our rules for the enrolled Sash were if you take a chance that it went badly, try something that exploded, push something a little bit past the edge, awesome, here's an award in front of the rest of the team for us to all acknowledge your contribution in trying to move things forward. There's a sidebar there that executional failure, people who really weren't trying, they didn't get the enrolled Sash. It was really for trying to push that limit and push the edge. And so the teams would get together, whether you're in Dev or Ops, every week, and there's lots of opportunities to hand out an enrolled Sash, so we did it a lot. That gets me to, I think, my first big takeaway for everyone. And you've all heard this in conferences or podcasts or whatever, but DevOps needs a culture. And it doesn't matter what the culture is. It doesn't have to be some brilliant idea that you've come up with. It can be something silly. Do we have a problem?
In the mode of continuous improvement,
Oh, we're going to continuously improve my audio delivery.
I'm sorry for the interruption, but you see something, fix something.
Check, check, check. Am I back?
And I apologize for that, but I want the audio to be awesome for you.
Yeah, how's that?
Yeah, that's my
Whoa,
bad. So,
that's okay.
so you keep rocking it. There we go.
Awesome. Continuously improving. Whoa. Let's turn the volume down just like a skosh. So my point about culture is culture, all that really means is it's a shared experience, right? It's the in-joke that we all participate in. It's the thing that everybody does together that we get to do together. And so I'd encourage you to be thoughtful about coming up with some kind of cultural artifact that you can use in your team, ideally that highlights a skill or behavior that you want others to follow, and just start doing it. It can be ridiculous. Etsy has a great blog post about the 3-arm sweater that they gave out to people whenever they screwed up during an on-call incident. These things are important to DevOps. So let's get back to our sort of our narrative. So we got through this phase 2. We had the best fourth quarter the business had ever experienced, which was awesome. So the ops team nailed it. And as we got through sort of the holidays, the dev team had done a really nice job of having all of the basic trappings of what our systems and our architecture were going to look like. And it was time for us to sit everybody back down and start working together here in our phase 3 from February to September. And the first thing that we discovered was that we had developed silos. Now, I don't want you to think I'm an idiot, but it turns out when you have teams working in completely different work streams, they're going to develop silos. And this probably shouldn't have come as a shock to me, but it really did. And to share and to be very candid with you for a minute, it was a really hard time for me professionally. I had spent years trying to build a collaborative DevOps culture. I'm passionate about it. And during the most critical project I'd ever worked on in my career, I sat down and realized that we had become the thing that I worked so hard for us not to be. Front and back end teams were deeply involved in the blame game. Your Swagger contract sucks. You didn't approve my pull request on time. We're missing deadlines and it's each other's fault. Both of them blaming ops because ops hadn't been there to help all along. Ops team, honestly, like, this is a tire fire. Let's get some popcorn and watch. But there was no, there was just no foundation having 3 separate teams working in different work streams for 4 months for them to come to an agreement. And these are people who were friends with each other, who drank beer together after work, but when we sat down and tried to work on the problems that were real in the project, there was nothing. And so I didn't go on like a spirit journey or anything, but really tried to come up with something that we could start doing that would create a foundation to rebuild our culture that we'd unraveled in 4 short months. And I got really interested in the idea of shared work streams, and I kind of mentioned this briefly in a slide. This is a quick diagram of how we managed things in the first iteration of our product. So both teams, both Dev and Ops, used Git, we used version control. The Ops team used Puppet then to manage and instrument all of their changes through or implement all of their changes through our pipelines, and the devs used a more standard, software development workflow. But sort of in the spirit of immutability, but more in the spirit of creating some shared environment, we adopted this joined work stream instead. So everything that was going to go out, whether it was infrastructure, whether it was systems, or whether it was code, was going to follow the exact same path. And there's sort of a nascent flavor of this that the devs had worked on, but as a starting point, we got both teams to work on it. Everybody needed the delivery pipeline to work, to be reliable, to be fast, and we all had the same concerns with it. Whether you were ops or front end or back end or data, everybody's going through this pipeline, so it's got to be rock solid. And it gave those teams a place to start that we had just that, a shared need on. This is my second big learning and advice for everybody in DevOps. DevOps teams need shared perspective, and I'm a strong believer in common tools as one way to get to that shared perspective. There's lots. I think we all know that engineering teams tend to kind of fragment on tool lines, and they absolutely tend to adopt highly specialized tools. And being engineers, we want the best tool for the job. But if those choices land you in a place that 3 people in your organization use that tool, and 3 people use that, and 10 people use that, and 5 people use this, we have a fragmented perspective about our tooling, and it's tough for those teams to get together. I am certain you have all been in a meeting where somebody's talking about a challenge they're experiencing and somebody else says, well, that's because of your tool choice, right? Getting everybody into a common tooling gives them, again, common ground to work together. So the second thing we did during this time is we focused on a site reliability engineering practice, which we really didn't have as a formal thing before. If you're not familiar with SRE, this is a great quote from Ben Traynor-Sloss, who's sort of the father of SRE. And he says, fundamentally, SRE is what happens when you ask a software engineer to design an operations function. And what that really means when you think about it, particularly if you have sort of bimodal operation or you don't have a history of ops and dev collaborating, what this means is the ops team gets to come and teach the developers what's important about ops. What are the functions of our job? Why do we do them? Why do they need to happen? And then the software developers get to say, well, that's interesting. I think I can implement that in code like this. And here, ops person, this is how I'm writing this code. Would you like to learn how to write the code? The 2 teams get to learn from each other. And as we saw on the very first slide, comms, learning, and sharing is this fundamental part of DevOps. And this is what I really loved about SRE, is ops got to share with dev what was important to make things reliable, and dev got to share with ops how to write code. This is my next big learning for all of us. DevOps teams need a shared goal, right? Traditionally, developers are responsible for features, and ops is responsible for reliability, right? That is, dev writes the code, throws it over the wall, operators operate it. There is not a shared goal in that model that you can use to have your teams join together behind a common theme. And SRE as a practice is sort of definitionally a common goal. Reliability, but treating reliability as a feature and as a software function instead of some other thing that happens out of band from our other activities. So DevOps teams absolutely have to have common goals. So getting back to my narrative real quick, we really spent those first couple of months of phase 1 of our SRE work focusing on our stack, so all of our monitoring, getting a swag at metrics, and building out some of the tools that we would use to understand this environment we were giving birth to. I want to highlight the last 3 bullet points because I think that those are the most important. Everybody has different tools. You're all going to choose different tools. Let's not worry about that. The 3 things that I really stress when I talk to folks about SRE are first of all, run books. Second of all, blameless post-incident reviews of everything. And lastly, iteration. So we got into a cadence with our team that every week we were talking about everything that went well and went badly in the previous week. We were updating our run books in support of that, and then we were taking a continuous improvement, just like my mic, approach to saying, okay, that didn't go well last week, let's address it this week, or let's address it 2 weeks out. I want to take a moment and talk about run books. Quick show of hands, how many people have a concept of run books that they use? It's awesome. Do more. Everybody whose hand doesn't come up, this is something that's really important. Something that I don't think gets talked about quite enough in conferences like this is there's a very real skills gap between DevOps. I have a Cisco certified network administrator and an Oracle database administrator and a JavaScript engineer, and you cannot swap them out as a starting proposition. They do not have the skills or the background to operate each other's roles. So runbooks are at least a start to help you bridge that gap. At Craftsy, we adopted this basic approach. So every runbook had a system overview. What is this thing? What does it do? What role does it play in the broader scope of things? The second thing on every runbook was the clear escalation path. If you are here and you are reading this runbook and you do not know what to do, call this person, escalate to this group, whatever. You don't have to feel like you're struggling to solve a problem on your own. You can get help. Then we went through and described all the alerts associated with the service or application, all the known failure conditions, the known recovery procedures, and the incident history. The goal being, if you were a JavaScript developer trying to troubleshoot a VPC IPsec connection, you could actually read something, make sense of it, maybe try something, maybe not, but at least have context of what you're dealing with, and then who to call to get help when ultimately you couldn't fix it on your own. These were a constant focus of our SRE iterations. There was not a week in which we didn't update probably a dozen runbooks. So that got us in a place to really start building out what became our production environment, and that constituted the second phase of this rewrite project, where we built a production environment. We went through penetration testing. We fixed an awful lot of security holes. It turns out when you let devs write code for like 6 months without any ops involvement, it gets a little shaky sometimes. We did load tests, we did resilience tests, we did recovery tests, but we continued on this mantra of blameless post-incident review of everything. We updated our runbooks constantly, and we took an iterative approach to trying to get better. There was never a time where like, well, this is going to take months to fix. We can't do it. We were always just trying to chip away at the big problems instead of putting a pin in them and waiting. So this is not entirely advice, but I want to point this out because I think it's sort of advice, and that's, I took a mantra during this time of telling everybody to quack like a duck, right? So we built a production environment, and there was nobody on it, no users were using it, we weren't transacting in it, but I knew that this team had to be ready when we launched this. I spent the better part of 15 months trying to come up with some way that I could be confident when we flipped the big metaphorical switch that night that everything was going to work. And there was no way I could convince myself through load testing or regression or anything that that was going to be true. I had a lot of hope, but hope only gets you so far. And so what I wanted the team to do was be well rehearsed in responding to problems. So starting on May 1st through our launch, we treated everything that happened in our pretend, fake, not launched production environment like it was real. We had on-call rotations, we had handoffs, people got paged in the middle of the night about a problem that nobody knew about or discovered for 8 hours, but they responded to it. And it got them in the habit of working together, and it got them in the habit of acting like, quacking like a duck, right? This does lead, though, to my last, so I think, big advice for everybody, is your DevOps teams need space to learn. If you go back, and I know this is kind of absurd, nobody will really do this, but if you go back and you say, all right, I went to a DevOps conference, we're in a DevOps, it's awesome, you're all on call, now go make sure everything doesn't catch on fire and ruin our business, like it's not going to be successful. Similarly, you can't give a team Sally's old workstation, call it an R&D environment, and then expect them to learn from that into production. You've got to give your team a low-risk place that they can treat like it's real, that has some real skin in the game, but doesn't have all of the crushing pressure of operating a production environment, because it doesn't give a team opportunity, first of all, to innovate, and two, particularly if you're struggling with sort of blame in your culture, no one's going to take chances, and nobody really wants to step into that high risk as a first order of business. You've got to give your teams space to experiment and space to try. And they've got to be safe spaces. So that got us to launch. A lot of really awesome things happened. Great news, it went well. I didn't get fired. Woo! The big bullet point that I call out is, so like I mentioned, we were AWS ops, we had RDS underneath all of our services. With 45 minutes after we launched, we actually had an RDS database fail, and fail over successfully. And the launch team didn't even notice it. The impact to the system was so minuscule. And having spent 5 years going to bed every night praying for the database to survive another day, this was a huge win for me as an architect and as a manager of a technical team. We did more code pushes in the first week than we had in the preceding year combined. We had about 85% automated test coverage, and most importantly, all of the KPIs that we were tracking as a business bumped and continued to bump as people got used to the new system. I am probably most proud of the fact that for that time, in the first, actually I think the first month of operation, we had 0 Sev 1 or Sev 2 incidents. It all worked. It worked like we'd hoped. Hooray! So quick scorecard as we're winding this down. Before and after in our DevOps, we really were able to nail all this. We were in a place that Dev and Ops both wrote code and infrastructure. Our database administrator wrote 2 services that were part of our procurement and fulfillment processes. That was not a skill that he came to the game with. I had front-end engineers managing our Fastly caches, managing our continuous deployment pipeline, and working in Terraform. We very much got to immutable infrastructure. We had a fantastic shared on-call model with much less escalation as the teams got the skills necessary to operate sort of cross-functionally. And we very much had joined work streams. Everybody's in that same pipeline for everything that was going out the door. We really nailed all of this too. I won't talk about this, but we very much got there. This bottom one, we went from limited scale to less limited scale. Nothing's unlimited, but we got that pretty well. And lastly, in our culture, we almost nailed all of these. The now somewhat famous phrase that was coined by one of our DevOps engineers was we got to continue-ish deployment. So of that service family that we had written, many of them, actually most of them, we'd be able to go through automated tests and just release to production constantly. But being an e-commerce company, add to cart, checkout, pricing services, those things represented still pretty much significant risk. And so we had some gated releases around those, where we were still able to deploy continuously. Most of our releases got low risk. We mostly got to test automation. That was a really hard one and probably another talk someday. But I think what I was most proud of really from our culture is we got to a shared work and responsibility model that actually worked for the team. So just to kind of recap and tie all this together, my big pieces of advice for you, that like if you've gone to any other DevOps days, somebody else has already told you, and I had been going to DevOps days for years and I had heard this, but living it is an entirely different thing. Your DevOps teams need shared culture, they need shared tools, they need shared goals, and they need spaces to try. And that is my recipe and my advice for being successful in your DevOps practice, which I hope that this conference and this talk helps you get to. That's all I have for you today. I'm Matthew Boeckman. I'm at Matthew Boeckman on Twitter and Dryas.io. Woo! Time for questions?
Sure.
Do we have any time for questions? Do we have time for questions? Are there any questions?
Yes, we do.
Any questions? Great question. The question was, how big was the team? So Craftsy Engineering at this point was 54. About evenly split front end, back end. We had about 6 in DevOps, about the same in data analytics, and then a handful of QA and product around there. So all up in the 50s. Huge question. The question was, what was leadership's take? I didn't mention this in the slide. If you go back later and read about software rewrites, first of all, don't. They're depressing. But second of all, one of the big questions you end up having to decide is you kind of get 2 choices. You can either write against your new application and continue to maintain the current application, which has some pretty material challenges, or you can choose to freeze your old application and spend all your time writing the new application, which gets you there faster, but the business doesn't get happy with. We opted for this answer, and it took a lot of work, probably is the best way to put it, as an executive, to spend time with business owners and say, I know we haven't changed the site in 6 months. When we change it, it's going to be awesome, though. And we got there not just through those kinds of words, but we had sometimes weekly, more properly probably said monthly demos that the rest of the business, the entire company could come and see. This is what our new experience is going to be like if you're buying a pattern. This is what your new experience is going to be like if you're buying a class. So we tried to get in front of that and let the rest of the company see that we were making progress, that it wasn't just engineers back in the corner with a bunch of promises that they weren't going to fulfill. It was hard, but we had a lot of buy-in to our engineering culture and our ability to deliver, and that's kind of how we dealt with that. Anybody else? Awesome. Oh, wait, go ahead, yeah. So the question was, when we were picking the tools, was it a coin flip? Was it a big battle? What was it? It was a little bit of all of those things, and it was a lot of iterations. So 2 months is not enough time to adequately canvas all of the tools and all of the options you get to, right? It just isn't. And so there were some that were just like, we're going to use Terraform, done, right? There were others that we made a choice early in that POC stage that we had to back off. So we were going to use HA proxy for load balancing across all of our database tiers. We discovered in our case that introduced way more complexity and was not reliable, and so we yanked that in the spring. But I thought the team was really good at having kind of an open and objective approach to tool selection. All of this was new enough, and everybody was kind of excited to get to do something different that we were able to get pretty good buy-in on, let's try these as a starting point. Awesome. Oh, one more. So the question was, how did we build rigor around the run books and keeping those current? When we do post-incident reviews, and I encourage all teams to do this, if you're going to sit down and talk about what has gone well and what has not gone well, it can't just be a conversation. You actually have to make actionable work out of it. So at the back end of all of our post-incident reviews was stuff that sat on a backlog. And the backlog was full of update runbook, update runbook, update runbook. And so we were able to manage that in the same way that I would manage deliverables from any team, whether they were writing code or standing up servers or whatever it was. It's certainly more work to do it that way, but I had spent, as I'm sure many have, many years sitting around talking about things that never got actioned. And so that was the thing I took on myself, to just be the guy who wrote a whole bunch of tickets. But it worked. It gave us a way to keep it mindful for people that this is something that we value as much as the code that you're going to write. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Oh. Yeah. Yeah, so the question was, how much resistance do we run up against initially? Not as much as I think you would have traditionally. Like I said, we had a pretty good DevOps culture to begin with. These teams were used to working together. Before we split up their work streams, they were very trusting of each other. And so I do remember several conversations, hour-long conversations with individual engineers, trying to help them get comfortable with it. And I think there's a tweet that I saw yesterday that I'll do a bad job of retweeting verbally right now, but you can't adopt cultural change without remembering that management and leadership is an active skill. And I think that where you have challenges in your teams to get buy-in and to get them to work together, this is where your leaders have to spend the time, spend the extra hour, spend the extra 30 minutes with somebody and understand their concerns. And we were in a place, I didn't have a choice. There wasn't another way we were going to be able to do this. And so there was a part of it was like, this is kind of how it's going to be, and I'm sorry, but at least trying to let them feel like they had been heard. And if there were things I could do to mitigate some of their concerns, we would. But it was a labor-intensive process to get around those kinds of objections. Right, now I'm really leaving. Thank you, everybody.